So this panel is bootstrapping deep tech, and it's a thing about for deep tech founders. You know, you have a product that has a long research and development timeline, and you are so far pre-revenue that you're not even thinking about it yet. How do you think about advancing that technology, particularly in a venture market that is not 2021 and probably will not be 2021 ever again? So. We have a really great panel here today. Old and new friends. Two of them have had to eat my cooking, so they're still here. But I think particularly exciting because we have a really great representation of perspectives on this. We have Steve Ferguson, who represents the public sector point of view, and I'll have them introduce themselves and give more of their STEAM backgrounds. Kelly Booth, who represents sort of the founder and operator point of view, and then Tayo, who has sat in a lot of different seats, including the venture capital seat, and so can talk to us about when and how and when not to chase that source of funding. So without further ado, let me just go ahead and pass it down and ask you all to provide a little bit of background about yourselves and what you do. So Steve, let's start with you.
So yes, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Steve Ferguson. I'm at the public sector rep for the panel here. But I'm at the National Institutes of Health in the Office of Technology Transfer, representing the part of the NIH you probably should be interacting with. That's the intramural research program. It's the part of NIH that does not give away the money. So we're not quite as popular at some of these conferences as some of the other folks. But given the topic here in terms of being able to leverage your resources and extend the timeline for the company to meet sort of particularly in the healthcare sector, it's really the intimate research program where I've representing in terms of technology transfer, business, and licensing. So my background is trained as a scientist, worked in industry for a number of years. I came back to the NIH. I'm involved with these sort of transactions where we tend to work with small companies. So I think it's going to be a very interesting panel. I look forward to interacting with everyone.
Good afternoon. I'm Kelly Booth. I am a founder. I have a company called Early Charm Ventures that I co-founded with my husband, which is always interesting to work and live with your husband. We are still married after 12 years. So Early Charm goes into universities primarily. I should probably visit Stephen over here. We look for interesting tech that, in our minds, that does not need a lot of venture capital backing. To take some product to market. It may not always be the first product that you think of that's going to make you a big buck, but we look at how you bootstrap a company to make it through the product development life cycle without spending a lot of time and resources looking for capital. And so we have about 30 small companies. We do, because we do so many licenses from universities, we tend to spin those into their own companies just to manage the license terms. But we have about 30 small companies that we have formed that all operate under the Early Charm umbrella. We have about 45 employees that work for Early Charm in various capacities, from scientists to legal counsel to accountants to marketing people, operations people, and we share those resources across all of the different projects or companies that we've founded. And so I think the first one that I founded in 2008 when I lived in Mississippi is still operating, and then we've added to that when we moved to Baltimore in 2012.
And hello, everyone. My name's Tayo Sanders II, representing the VC side of things. My background, though, is a scientist as well by training, in biomedical engineering and vaccine research in particular. But I joined a venture capital firm that launched a new office out of Boston back in 2019. I was the first life science associate there, so I had the benefit of being able to structure a lot of the portfolio. We invested in life science tools and diagnostics, worked a lot with companies spinning out of universities, so investing at the seed stage and Series A, which I find personally the most interesting, but also the most challenging. Also have some experience working directly as an operator. I was at Southern Research for a couple of years down in Birmingham, Alabama, 83-year-old nonprofit translational research institute. There I was in charge of commercialization efforts for the drug portfolio. And most recently right now, wearing a couple of hats, but working on launching a new fund in the first quarter of next year. That'll be an early stage pre-seed and seed biotechnology fund, as well as working on a few economic development projects. So thinking about how can life sciences and biotech be a powerful tool to create additional kind of technology-based and innovation research economies across the United States, not just in Boston and SF, but appreciate the time.
Cool. All right. Well, and I feel lucky to be here with these folks. So let's start with some definitions. Raise your hand here if bootstrapping deep tech even makes sense to you. Okay. Feels like a word salad. That's good. Well, let's start with then some definitions from our panel, and maybe we'll go in reverse. What does bootstrapping deep tech mean?
Let's see, bootstrapping deep tech. I mean, I think if we break it apart a little bit, bootstrapping in so many ways is thinking about, okay, you're not one of the privileged few to get $100 million seed round from, Arch Ventures or some other blue chip firm. And then deep tech, to me is, it's kind of related to, in a lot of ways, I think, like a pharmaceutical product where you may not be, you're not expecting revenue generation extremely early in your development cycle. It might take 5 to 10 years. Commonwealth Fusion is like probably the biggest example of a deep tech program. And so bootstrapping deep tech is really thinking about, okay, if you're not one of these, highly networked or just lucky people to receive this type of venture capital or investor interest, but you still have an insight and a really powerful solution to disrupt or augment an industry. How do you actually push that forward, leveraging every single resource available? And there's a wide network, but it's not necessarily the easiest path to chart.
Right. Kelly, what about you? What does bootstrapping deep tech mean?
Yeah, for us, I would say that the technologies that we're working on that I would consider deep tech and bootstrapping, right? These are technologies that are developing at different speeds with the final application, right? It's not typically something that, I'm making the final product and it's the only thing. As soon as it's ready, the market's ready for it. The technologies that I'm developing require all the pieces of that final product to develop at some speed together. And a lot of times we're way ahead of the curve, right? Like, we've got something, but nobody needs it yet because the rest of the enabling technology is not there yet. And so, to me, those are the technologies that are really challenging, right? Because it's not all under your control. The market's never under your control, but the technology development piece requires a lot of partners. And so when I think of bootstrapping, it's not necessarily pulling money out of my own pocket. It's not necessarily selling another product to carry me until the market's ready for our solution. But it is really looking for other partners in the field, strategic partners in the field that will work together over the course of several years to bring something to market. And that's where we find a lot of success. And a lot of times it's with big commercial partners, right? When you really understand what they need, you can start tailoring products for them. We're much more nimble than a big, DuPont or I don't know. I could list a number of them, but I probably shouldn't. So we're nimble to develop things that are of interest to them, but we also can then slow down and wait for them to catch up. So that's always the game, right? Is how do I stay in business long enough for those big new techs to hit the market?
Great, Steve.
So I think that describes sort of our typical partnerships. We're, as a science agency from our interim research program, we're interested in those hard problems. We're interested in those unmet market needs that may take a little bit longer to market. So that's, and as someone who's been around since, I guess the NIH was 1887, founded in New York, but relocated soon after to here at the DMV, these are the types of things that we do very well with in terms of the activities.
It's part of bootstrapping.
My mom wouldn't call during the conference. No, the answer. And so the thing for us is that these sorts of challenges are really usually focused by small companies. So we're sort of the $5 billion R&D organization that you didn't know you had. You fund us every April 15th. So thank you for your support. But we can't do it, even with that kind of funding, in terms of our own R&D program of 8,000 scientists, without working with companies. And so often there are issues that we are aware of, but often there's technologies and problems that companies bring to us for R&D efforts. So we think it's really a collaborative effort. And we've seen some of the results here in the Maryland area. If you look at the success that Kite has had, as MedImmune has, a number of companies, yes, they had a lot of other talent, but some of the core values were either scientific staff from our organization or innovations that they were able to take and run with. So it's really about that kind of collaborations.
Great. So bootstrapping, I think that's exactly right. So bootstrapping means that you or your friends don't, you're not, you don't have deep pockets necessarily, but you have to pay yourself, you have to pay your bills, you have to pay your team. So you have a business to keep running, but deep tech implies, it's not a software product. You're not going to drop out of your Harvard dorm and go make $1 billion tomorrow. It implies that there's going to be some timeline to develop. As Kelly said, sometimes in a rapidly changing market, you're going to need to think about that development timeline. So we're going to split this up by talking about 3 things that founders and operators probably have to think about a lot: finance, operating models, and people. And we'll get as far as we can. I will save the last 15 minutes at least for some audience Q&A. But let's start with finance. And so again, everybody here is pretty well versed in thinking about some unique and non-venture sources of capital. And so let's start with Kelly. As you are operating Early Charm and all of your companies, how do you think about layering together different sources of funding, be they public or private? And in particular, I think a lot of people in this ecosystem know that you guys really avoid venture funding. So tell us a little bit about why you've chosen to avoid that, and then how you layer together these funding sources.
Well, I think first and foremost, we all know that if you take somebody else's money from a venture fund, they want a piece of your business. And that's number one. Number two, they also tend to like to actively be involved in your business, which sometimes is a good thing and sometimes it's not a good thing. So we have and the other reason we've elected to stay away from it is because we have so many small licenses from so many different universities. The constant venture, if we were looking for venture funding for everything that we were to license, that would be all we did. There would never be time for anything else because let's face it, raising money is not fast. It's not easy. It's full of heartbreak and maybe if you're lucky, exhilaration at the end. And then you actually have to start to work again. So that's part of the reason that we have not done it. And I shouldn't say haven't done it. It is not our core business. We have raised funds for there's just certain products that need venture funding. And so you do that. But what we look for instead is ways to prove the technology. We look for the non-dilutive pathways first. So TEDCO is a great resource. I'm going to plug them since I'm here. Their MII program is great. Hopefully they'll have an SBIR matching fund some sooner rather than later. Your federal agencies, there's the SBIRs and things like that, which are great. But when we start talking about building strategic partnerships, you really need to be looking for who is the ultimate user for that tech and forming that partnership. It can be with the federal government. I've done a lot of work with the DoD, but not SBIR after SBIR. It's actually working with a development group there to understand what they need and provide those services to them and a product to them at the end. We're working with the Department of Energy right now on the Million Mile Fuel Cell project, right? But so now I have 4 partners. I have the Department of Energy. I have somebody who builds fuel cells. I have somebody who tests fuel cells. I have somebody who can do a bunch of carbonization work. So I am now embedded throughout the entire supply chain. Those are the important things to me in how you fund a new tech that has meaning, right? That moves the needle a lot further than just if somebody had just given me venture capital money, the same amount of money, I would never make the same progress that I'm planning on making because I wouldn't necessarily have the built-in partnerships.
That's great. And you alluded to something, I think, and this next one is going to go to Steve. I think a lot of us in this entrepreneurial space are familiar with, the dreaded 4-letter SBIR, STTR. And of course, those are great resources to go after, but there is a lot more the federal government has to offer. So tell us about, what does that look like and how do folks approach it?
He has a great one.
Right. So the the thing to be thinking about is your sort of strategic plan, how you plan to grow the company. And certainly Uncle Sam with the SBI program is one opportunity, but you're missing out on the jewel of the crown, basically. At NIH, that's the intramural research program. So if you're thinking about preclinical and clinical work, when do you want to collaborate with the world's largest holder of the INDs? Well, that's NIH. The FDA doesn't publish a stat list, a ranking like you see in the football polls, but we're number one. We don't have a football team, but in clinical trials INDs, we're number one. The other thing about partnerships is that yes, you could partner with pharma and venture capitals. If you're able to access that, God bless. But wouldn't you want to have a partner that you're working with that didn't mess up your cap table, that didn't want, actually refuses to take stock in your company? Because that's us, because we have so much engagement as a customer, as a funder. We don't want to own the company. We want to collaborate because we're really looking at more advancing the science. The other thing about if you were looking for a collaborator, yes, there's a lot of great university places that you can work here. Hopkins here in Baltimore, University of Maryland, other places. But wouldn't you rather have a scientific collaborator where the overhead rate was zero? And we can afford, we can't go any lower than zero, sorry. But that's because you're already funding that. So we, God willing, we receive our annual appropriation from Congress, and that covers that type of activity. So you need to think about, yes, there's a lot of opportunities for where you could go as a small company, but think about what's going to give you the most bang for the buck of your time and effort, and what's going to have the greatest long-term impact. And so I think be thinking about NIH and thinking about some of the other federal labs as well as an opportunity to really leverage what you're doing. And when we're working on a project with you, yes, we're not giving you money from our intramural program, but we're undertaking projects that otherwise you would have to spend. And so we're thinking about lengthening your runway, lowering your burn rate because you're collaborating with a federal agency.
That's great. And to build on that, Steve, I think one reason that SBIRs, STRs are a go-to is because they're easy to find. The website.
Where's the road? They're great. They're a great opportunity, no doubt about that. But I think you have to think about what else is there,
Yeah. So where is the front door for people who are looking to work with the NIH intramural program, for example?
Well, you could come to booth 21. Yeah.
That's the front door.
Right down the hallway here. But we have a partnership offices. My colleague Michael Salgaller here from the NCI Tech Transfer Program is here. And between the two of us, we can serve as sort of a gateway for you in terms of trying to make the connections. We can't always guarantee that there is a program that wants to collaborate on your project, but if it's something that goes through a regulatory process, a drug, a vaccine, a diagnostic, chances are that it is part of your strategy. That's probably of interest. As we have 27 institutes, so we have more flavors than Baskin and Robbins in terms of opportunities in terms of your area. If you're in direct-to-consumer, over the counter, not so much our area right now, but that's really not a deep state. I'm seeing a deep play anyway.
Right. Perfect. And then Tyler, now think about the venture side. I think Kelly said this: if you are a founder and an operator, fundraising is itself a full-time job. So for folks that you have invested in, how do you think about splitting time between venture fundraising and maybe trying to bootstrap or make money through other means?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it depends on several factors, of course, stage of the company, the actual technology itself. And I think the realization that finding a bad partner or engaging with a bad partner can be more lethal to the business than anything else, unfortunately. So I think for technologies, right, where there are ample resources, and so much of this is, I think it behooves you to pay attention to what's happening on the national level and on the state level. So, thinking about Chips and Science Act as an example, thinking about just being really aware of what are the programs actually available, where is money flowing that's relevant to your technology or the business you're trying to build. We had a couple of companies out in the battery space. Those companies are funded incredibly well by the DOE, and they're also supported by downflow from Chips and Science Act. And they've had to take very little venture capital money because of that. Or if they have taken VC money, it's been purely because they can, and it's and people are fighting to get into the rounds. So I think the split there again kind of depends on a lot of those factors. I think your a good VC partner, investor partner, also doesn't want to give up additional equity if they don't have to, right? There has to be a good reason for it. And so in terms of that split, VC, it's usually when, okay, we have to meet a minimal, a key milestone that's going to open up strategic engagements with big commercial partners, or going to open up an ability for us to be highly competitive for a non-dilutive funding opportunity. I think, it's continuing to I think it's being really mindful about respecting the equity that you have, wanting to maintain that for the folks that are putting effort into the company, and again, ensuring that you're being really careful about what milestones you're approaching, and being aware of the opportunities that are available. And maybe to jump on one other thing, I think right now we're seeing regional stakeholders invest in innovation in a way that we haven't in a really long time. And just a really quick example, one of our companies was early stage RNA manufacturing company. This was back in 2019. We ultimately invested in them a smaller round of about $6 million. But a year later, we were able to get $5.5 million, and $5 million of that was from the state of New Mexico, and then another $500,000 was from Rio Rancho. That happened because we moved the company from Santa Fe, where they cared a lot about tourism and did not care about an innovative tech company. Why should they? To Rio Rancho, a city right outside of Albuquerque, that was incredibly interested in developing that economy, and saw biotech as a way to do that. University of New Mexico was nearby. They're starting to kind of build up a base of technology, and so I think more and more city state actors are on board with this idea that we don't want to just bring another Amazon warehouse to our community, or another car manufacturing plant. While those bring jobs, right, they don't necessarily bring the highest paying jobs and really elevate people out of their current socioeconomic status. So they were big backers. They also, because we built a relationship with them, helped us secure an IRB, an industry revenue bond, which can be a lot more advantageous than an SBA loan because it's a lot lower on the interest rate, and you can have a very long maturity date as well. But we had to retrofit a facility, and that IRB covered that retrofit. So there are a lot of ways that I think if you can build relationships, identify communities that see the potential in what you're doing, and as deep tech, oftentimes the advantage over something like maybe a therapeutics company that's going to ultimately outsource a lot of their work, is that you are likely bringing jobs. You do require infrastructure. If you're a battery manufacturing company, again, as an example, or RNA manufacturing in this case. So those are just a couple of really other hits I wanted to mention in terms of engaging with regional actors. But on the venture side, like I said, I think it's kind of the factors I mentioned, in that working with a partner to ensure you're defining a path that isn't going to overexpose you to unnecessary equity dilution.
I think that's really well said, and I think particularly this idea of when you think about venture fundraising, you're automatically thinking about networking, right, and how to sort of build relationships with the right set of investors. It's almost important to think about engaging with state and regional and local stakeholders in the same way, because oftentimes increasingly they are tasked with identifying ways to bring innovation into their community. So I think TEDCO is obviously a great example, but there are a lot of other programs throughout the state of Maryland, either at the local, regional, or statewide level that are also encouraging that sort of activity. Think about treating that in the same way that you might treat your fundraising. I now want to pivot to operating models, because again, that's an area where I think you can find a lot of efficiency when you think about what that timeline looks like. And so, Kelly, I want to start with you, because I think you all are sort of the poster child here. So you described it a little bit earlier, but tell us about the operating model, how you came to it, and why it works.
Yeah. So, I didn't say this to begin with, but I'm an engineer also. I worked for a large chemical manufacturing company for many years, and then I got thrown into the tech transfer world. So I started an outsourced tech transfer for the University of Southern Mississippi, because there wasn't a whole lot for a chemical engineer to do there when I had to move there. And so I started learning all about tech transfer. That's how I got started, and that's how I recognized that there were some tech that was coming out of there that I was never going to be able to license, because it was I don't know, we just needed to start up a founder in an ecosystem, which was not there in Mississippi at the time, although it is much improved since then. And so I started my own company. This is the one I was telling you about, the first one I ever started. And when I started it, I was like, well, now what am I going to do? So one day I'm in the lab, I'm mixing face paint. That's what I was doing. I was making face paint for the military to prevent burns from IEDs. So one day I'm in the lab, and then the next day I'm running payroll. And then the next day I'm trying to hire new people. And then another day I'm writing a patent. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is just a lot for any one person to do. And there's not many people who can do that. I mean, I recognized I was not doing any one of those jobs really well. And so that's how we started trying to build the ecosystem of people who could help. And that's sort of the concept that which Early Charm was founded on, right? That each, let's say, technology, each company for us is always at different stages in the commercial development, the technology development, the IP development of those projects. And they need different people and different resources at different times. And a startup who needs to hire a marketing person, because there are certain marketing tasks or sales tasks or customer discovery tasks that do need to be done early on. You don't need that person for a long time after that necessarily, right? It's not a full-time job. You don't need a full-time CFO, accountant, but you need all those people at some point. And so the way Early Charm functions is you get what you need when you need it. And then you don't have to pay for it when you don't need it, which is what makes a lot of these techs more, I would say we use capital very efficiently because we're not paying for something we don't need when we don't need it. And so, and it is a hard resource to find, right? So when you hear about fractional CEOs and CFOs and things like that, it's good, but they're super expensive. My companies only get charged people's actual salaries when they use that resource. So it's a very efficient way, like I said, to use our capital.
That's great. And are there any product areas or technologies that you think that model doesn't work?
Well, I mean, for us, the reason it works is because we have so many projects or companies that are in different stages of development, right? So I think when you have everything that's moving in parallel or just it's very hard for a company that has one product or to do that, right? Because it just doesn't exist. So I don't know. It works well for all of my stuff is in advanced materials for the most part. There's a little bit of drug design, software tools, but for the most part, it's in advanced materials, and that's what I know best. So I hadn't considered it.
No, that's great. I think that's a really important insight is thinking about diversifying your tech portfolio, right? So having things at different stages of development, not taking on too much at once.
That's kind of part of the business model too. Let's face it. When you start a company, sometimes, as I was talking about earlier, sometimes it may be a little ahead of the market. Sometimes it's a little lagging, or it needs a partner. When you've diversified your holdings that way, I mean, sometimes like the face paint, I put it on the shelf for 7 years because, well, it turns out that the federal government no longer cared about face paint because. In the jungle, in the desert, they just didn't wear it as much, right? But when they came back 7 years later and said, well, now we're preparing for jungle warfare again, can we resurrect that project? I'm now able to say yes, because the people that were working on that, I just moved to another project until there was an actual market need for it. And so having all those things, having different projects at different stages also lets me just say, I'm going to put that on the shelf for a little while, or I don't have to kill anything. I just don't spend resources on it.
That's great. So that's one which we can almost think of as sort of decentralized, or maybe centralized administration and decentralizing your portfolio. Tyler, I want to pivot to you for a different model, which is thinking about how to come to revenue via things like services as you're developing your technology. So I know that's been relevant to some of the companies that you've invested in or some that you've operated. Tell us about where you've seen that work and maybe where you haven't.
Yeah, definitely. And really quick, just on the last question, I think sometimes I think the most common place where we see the kind of shared model stop working is just when the company gets too big, right? Where it's like, no, you need a dedicated, full now multi-person HR team, right? multi-person accounting team. But in general, I think there's a tremendous amount of value if you can share those resources, or if your investor partner, which I can talk a little bit about too, is able to offer some of those services as well. But yeah, it's a great question, and I think more than ever, I am seeing out of necessity, but it'll be interesting to see if this continues to be a current model. Folks identify ways, to basically start generating revenue, even if they are pre-product. Very easy, like probably a very recent examples on the drug development side. Typically, a company that's developing a new drug, they're not going to make any money until they exit the company, and that asset won't make any money until it's approved 10, 15 years later. However, there's a lot of technical talent in that company, to develop that drug. They're running assays, they're directing experiments. And so, there are folks that have found success in, providing bespoke CRO services, right? Especially if you're working on a pulmonary drug, you probably have some of the foremost experts in that pulmonary indication. That can be really valuable if you're trying to support other folks that are looking to test their drug, which they identified might have a disease-modifying effect in a pulmonary indication, but they're not necessarily specialists there. So I think identifying ways in which you can leverage your technical talent, and of course, this is at the cost potentially, right, of you advancing your own drug programs. But the great benefit is that, it allows you to continue to advance those drug programs, or at least continue to survive until you can pull some of the non-dilutive funding, until your intramural work with the NIH is completed, or until you're able to secure VC funding. So I think, again, thinking about the way you can leverage your technical talent and expertise, and that goes beyond drug development, I think, as well. Again, if you're a battery company, these are just ones that are from my own experience, helping folks understand better ways to do battery testing, or providing those again as services, because you already have that set up in house. For novel renewables as an example, I think can be really valuable. The biggest thing to always keep in mind is just making sure, understanding, how much are you pulling away from your main product development? You just have to be really careful with resource management from that perspective. But I think the service approach, maybe in 2019, 2020, we didn't want our startups to focus on that, but I think now more than ever we do. The other thing that it connects to is like you're now building a great reputation. You are also developing strategic relationships, and I completely agree that's probably one of the most important things to consider right now is how can you, from the beginning, start establishing and building the foundation for strategic relationships, whether they're with other small companies or large ones. I think there's a lot of value in identifying synergy to, again, move the market to a place where it's ready for all of your products if you're working with other small companies. And of course, there's value to working with larger organizations as well. They ultimately, in a best case scenario, they will be your investor, your co-developer, and your pilot, right? So I'll pause there.
That's great. Thanks, Dad.
Yeah, I would say I totally agree with the, it's a fine balance to keep focused on the long goal, but doing service work, testing, becoming an expert in your field from people on the outside looking in and say, oh my God, they know what they're talking about. They've delivered on, is it service projects or things like that, really builds your credibility, and it brings in a little bit of cash to keep everything going. And so we look for that opportunity as often as we can find it. How do I make a early product or service to get us started?
Let me ask a grossly unfair question. Is there a golden ratio when you think about, product development versus service, if that's a line of business you're able to get to?
I think it's very dependent, right? I think it's very dependent. So, for example, I have one company that, this is the one I'm spending most of my time with now, that we have a sonar that we put in shrimp ponds around the world to tell the farmer how many shrimp they have that they need to feed. That one, everybody wants fish, right? And I have people coming up and saying, if I paid you to develop this for fish, would you do it? And I'm like, and my tech people are like, yeah, I want to do fish. I'm like, no fish, because we have a pathway to revenue and sales. We need to ramp that up. So no, the answer there is 0% of your time could be spent on fish. On other projects, though, like our Electris, Electris spent a lot of fibers, which, can be used in everything from controlled release patches to masks, air filters, and membranes for fuel cells, right? So it's got a ton of opportunity. Those are all their individual markets, right? So the area is a lot grayer, right? Again, goes back to I'm building credibility with everybody that I work with and do a good job with, obviously. And so I'm much less likely to say, no, you cannot work on a bandage for someone because we're working on fuel cells. You know, it's a different mindset, and it uses a little bit of different talent for each project. And so that helps as well.
Right. And Steve, let me ask you on the operating model side, what are the most effective operating models for companies that you've seen that are working with the intramural program? Are they just standalone folks who are, giving you test article, or are they themselves pulling part of the weight? What is the right operating model to engage with you all?
Well, I think I always tell people that in terms of your operating model, sort of, we're neutral. So we can help on the clinical, the scientific aspect, the innovation part of it, but no, we don't want to see it on your board. We don't want to come to your conferences and your meetings to tell you how you're invest. We're expecting you to have. And so what that allows you to do is you have more flexibility. So we're happy that you use a CRO. We're happy that you collaborate with the university. It gives you a lot of flexibility, and we see a lot of different models. I mean, we've seen product launches coming from public-private partnerships where we licensed it to a nonprofit. Would I have thought that would have been even happened a few years ago? No, but we've seen some success. So I think so. We're open to it, and whether you're VC funded or non VC funded, like everybody else, hit the milestones. We're a health agency. We want to see products on the market. So however you get there is up to you, and we're not going to tell you how to do it. We can help on the scientific and clinical side, but we're expecting you to have the connections and the partnerships with either in the venture or corporate community to deliver. But we're not going to dictate one way or the other for you.
Great. I think I have 5 minutes left for my questions, and then we'll turn it over to the audience. So maybe a last lightning round focusing on people this time. So we've talked about financing, we've talked about operating models, and now we're going to talk about people and culture. Because again, those are what is it? Culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? So Tayo, how does if I'm thinking about venture, going out for venture funding versus bootstrapping a company, how am I thinking differently about my hires or my team members?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the reality is people are thinking about both, right? Bootstrapping and potentially venture fundraising. To what we just talked about, because I think a service model or some thinking about, early on, just imagining, okay, like if I'm not able to hit my 5 million, whatever your $2 million seed raise in the 2 or 3 years I expect, what then? Like, ideally, you don't want the company to just blow up and you have to go back to corporate or wherever you came from. So I think thinking really early on about, okay, what skills are going to be critical for developing this product, but also what kind of talent am I looking for that could also be customer facing, right? Could help us build out a service model, be powerful, networkers, but also understand maybe they've worked in industry and they're not just coming from academia, as an example, right? You don't have everyone just coming from academia. You have folks that have worked in that kind of client facing setting before. That's what I would certainly be thinking about, is, again, from that bootstrapping perspective, not just trying to identify individuals that can only work on product and maybe haven't worked in a service orientation before. Beyond that, I think there's if you are able to find an investor. I was mentioning this before. This is usually maybe not as relevant, but they can provide back-end services. There are deep tech investors are trying to differentiate themselves more in this area. Anzu, the firm I was at, they had HR, accounting, contract manufacturing support. That's actually very helpful if you've never worked with a CMO before, and real estate, and a few other areas, basically, where you could just contract people in at cost, essentially. and it was a very successful way to kind of be efficient with capital. So I think, again, that if you're in that position where you've already managed to find a partner, an investor there, that taking advantage of that is incredibly helpful and can help you reduce the hires you need on some of the other back-end services. But if you can identify organizations, I know there are some larger institutes. I was in Birmingham, Alabama. We were building something out for Southern Research and building out a program to provide technical assistance that included regulatory support, right? So, I think there's a variety of programs that are trying to crop up. Again, this is paying attention to what's happening in the region. I know Baltimore is focused on, it cares a lot about life sciences right now. They were Tech Hub's, designee as an example, and are continuing to build out from there. But I think if you can find as many opportunities to support on, again, back-end kind of standard services, identify talent that can be multi-purposed, right? You're gonna set yourself up better for a much, for longevity in the company in your pursuit of whatever the technology you're trying to build.
Perfect. Kelly, next one to you. And take this in whether you're thinking about archetypes or jobs themselves. If you're bootstrapping, who should be in the boat and who should not be in the boat?
Yeah, we've made this mistake a few times. So I want to go back to your first question a little bit because it feeds into that. Culture for a startup for me is I pick culture over, I'm going to say, capability. I judge culture first, right? It is the most important thing in your company is the values that you want the people that work for you to embody and to embrace. And it becomes particularly important when things aren't going good, right? The culture matters when things are bad. The culture is less important when things are good. When everything's good, everybody's happy. But when things are not going as planned, the culture that you build is going to determine how your company responds, right? And so I hire for culture first. And then, of course, you have to be able to do the job. So I'm looking for somebody who can do the job, but I 100% agree. I'm looking for somebody who is flexible in their job. So if I have a choice between a scientist who is social versus not social, and I'm thinking that I want to have a service model, I'm going to have to pick the one even that has more flexibility. And so and anybody who works with us will tell you that they've never had the same job 2 days in a row, which makes it fun. So you need to find somebody who likes that, right? So I just wanted to echo that. And then what was your question?
I think you answered it a lot, but who should be in the boat and who shouldn't be in the boat?
Yeah. I mean, I think people who are culturally similar to you need to be not similar to you, but that have value systems the same as you. And we actually spent a lot of time. It's hard when you're just a 2 or 3 person company to spend as much time. But as we grew and we made some mistakes, we were like, okay, we got to figure out how we stop making these mistakes, hiring mistakes, and really think about what's most important. And that's where we came up with culture first, personality fits second. And then I'm going to say the very unpopular thing is you get somebody in, and if it's not working, cut them loose as fast as you can. It's good for you and it's good for them. And when somebody is not happy at your company, it brings the whole vibe of the company down. And so that's not good for anybody.
Really quick. Yeah, I wanted to echo culture, most importantly, because it's not going to be an easy ride to the point of things not going well. If you're bootstrapping, almost certainly you're going to be hitting a lot of hurdles. And I think making sure that you're aligned on values and it's not just about the cash or the notoriety, the position, the title, whatever it might be. I mean, these are not easy things, obviously, to suss out. But I will completely agree. And this is one thing one of our portfolio companies I really respected about the CEO is that someone wasn't doing well, and you get a month, month, 2 months, and if it's not working, then yeah, it's in both parties' best interests, and those are not easy decisions to make. But I think they've done really well and have managed their money well because they were willing to make those hard decisions and recognize that they made a mistake in hiring and own that mistake as well, and communicate it to your team saying that was our mistake, not they're just getting hired or getting fired, excuse me, because they suck, right? It's being a responsible, taking ownership as a manager and recognizing that you ultimately pulled the trigger. That's super.
They suck for us, and always help them. I mean, that's the other thing, right? It's part of our culture, right? Just if somebody doesn't work out, it is helping you find out where you're going to work out and helping you network into another job, right? As a responsible employer. So.
Great. And then last question to you, Steve, before I turn it over to the audience. What is the most important cultural quality for a bootstrapper?
I think it's sort of at least for us, it's sort of keeping your eyes on the goal, and the goal is really, for us as public health, and for the corporate partner, it's the commercial development and growing the company. And while those sound a bit different, they really are the same in terms of that sort of focus. And I did like the comments here, in terms of being able to cut the ties, because if you're working with the NIH, you can cut the ties. You can fire NIH with 60 days notice. So not many people would want to, but if you think about all the things you could do in terms of various agreements, various projects, we know that you need flexibility, and things could change based upon funding or other business circumstances. So yes, you signed something, you agree with us, you're not stuck with us for life. You can fire the NIH or pick a different project or something else. So I think that's sort of flexibility is really important, and understanding that not everything is going to work out. It's hard. Yes, the things that we have are wonderful. Our intellectual property is fabulous, and our ideas are what are the best in the world. But yeah, not everything's going to be a product, and sometimes it's hard. We had to consult our scientists a little bit about that. But we understand also from the corporate perspective that not everything's going to work out. So this is why we like to do lots of agreements with a lot of different parties from not just Maryland and the U.S., but all over the world, because we don't know where it's going to come from. You may think that we're working with different parties competing for the same indication. Yes, we are, because we don't know which one's going to work. And so if yours work is great, but we have a sort of a broader mission. So that means it's a little more flexible, and not everything has to work, but we really want you to try really hard, because it really feels it's a scientific basis. And unless something goes wrong scientifically or clinically, we like your project to go forward.
Great. So just to summarize, and thank you all so much for sharing. I think just to summarize, on the financing side, treat your non-venture fundraising like you would treat your venture fundraising, build relationships, pay attention to what's going on in the market. Think about some of these creative funding sources. On the operating side, there are a lot of really great models that, thankfully, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are a lot of folks who've done that and can probably advise you. And I really like this point on diversifying your technology portfolio. And then on the people side, bring people in who align to your cultural values. Make, I think, if not hasty, make firm decisions that are going to be in long-term interest, even where they are painful in the short term. So let me now turn it over to the audience and see if y'all have any questions for our panel. Yeah.
Kelly, what's your business model? How are you funded? Do you take equity? How are you paid? You take equity?
Yeah. So we actually own and operate all of our companies. So there are a few instances where we have partnered with someone who already has a company or has an idea for a company, but generally at this point, we own and operate everything. Now, each of the small companies may have a co-founder, or the university will own a part of it, but in general, that's how we fund it.
Yeah. Next in the back.
Yeah, I'm super interested in this strategic partnership. It can measure cost and efficacy. And now I can't see it, but and just why I'm thinking about it. Like if you could Venn diagram strategic partnerships and market research or customer discovery, when you have a disruptive idea, disruptive product that you think requires that people keeping differences and they're used to do, it kind of excel. And if you ask people, geez, you need, what are your needs that you're thinking would you could fulfill in your product? They're not there. You never see if they see it. So if you have strategic partnerships, you think that you're kind of getting in to an ecosystem of people who are more likely to be able to be receptive to create things differently when they're a disruptive product that you have in mind. In other words, is that at all a pathway to finding more like-minded people that need to be?
Sometimes. I'll give you a vague one back. Sometimes, I mean, sometimes for me, yeah, we'll find people who are dreamers, and really in touch with what they feel the next big step for an industry or a market is, and that's always great. And then a lot of times you'll end up, especially depending on the company and what their business model is, right? I mean, if your business model is to make as much money from the products that I have today as fast as I could make them, and my idea of innovation is small improvements on what I have, they're probably never going to be a great strategic partner. So you really do have to find the people who have a vision that's different. And then you will find, much more open-mindedness to a whole new way of doing things.
Yeah, and I think if you have an organization as big as pick any of the big pharma, Merck or AstraZeneca, right? That they're ultimately made up by people, and the best success we've ever had is when you just finding your internal champion. That's the and that is a hard, and there's no roadmap or rule book to finding that. It's a lot of networking. It's figuring out what people care about at the organization generally. But it might take one try, it might take a dozen tries back at the organization, connecting with different people. But I think it's really like identifying and being able to recognize when you found an internal champion, and recognizing when someone's just spinning your wheels as well, right? Wasting time and not actually interested, or just, mining for information. I don't know. Just, kind of their job is to look at innovative technologies. So they're talking to you. But I think that's a big aspect of it. And large organizations, I think, are, they're at least creating the frameworks to engage smaller companies. It can still be very challenging, of course. And that's why also knowing the budget for these organizations can be incredibly helpful. What requires legal approval, right? Is it 10K? Is it 50K? Everyone's different. So you customize to build a project that that allows them to engage, because once you start that engagement, they have hands-on, they can now start to get everybody else excited about it in their division. And the other idea is thinking about, I think, just regional partners, like regional hospitals or other nonprofit research institutes, whatever it might be. They're not going to be the acquirer of you. They're not going to make the company a great, they're not going to be the ones that buy you out at the end of the day, but they still may have a lot of resources on hand. In North Carolina, as an example, RTI International invested a couple $1 million in one of the companies that we were working on, Tools of Diagnostics, because we found an internal champion there. They're like, we hate doing PCR the way that we're doing it now. We would love to do multiplexed assays. And it took a few tries at that organization, but it ended up being an incredible partnership. And we were not thinking about them, even though they were in our backyard for a long time. We were talking to some of the other, other big folks. So just thinking about really, who's in your backyard that you haven't actually connected with yet, and making sure you find those internal champions.
And I guess the other thing I would add is as a small company, you want to be sure that you have enough bandwidth, or at least minimal resources, really to conduct a relationship. It's not just a one-way street. Most collaborations are two-way exchanges, the ones that are most productive. So you need to have at least some resources, some time, some scientific talent, to keep that engagement going, because really it's going to have to benefit both parties, not just you. So that's one of the things that we look for as well.
I think Tayo's point about remembering the sort of humanity of the people that you're working with is really important. One of the things that we'd worked on together at Southern Research, it was a drug program that was not further along than any of our other drug programs, but the person who ended up taking it up and providing funding and support for it was somebody who'd been at Eli Lilly for 25 years. And he said, I've been chasing that target for my entire career. And this is a really cool way of getting at it. And so again, we didn't even think it was our strongest program, but he's human. He's a person who'd been looking at this for a long time. He wasn't just going to invest in it because it was that target. He thought it was also a novel way of approaching it. But that's oftentimes why you hear that. You hear that a lot in venture fundraising. You'll have 400 conversations and you might be picked up by one. It's not necessarily because they did the math differently from everybody else. It's just we're human and we all have our own interests. So, any other questions from audience? Going once. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us, and let's give a hand for our panel.